My brother wanted to do a collaboration on a paddleboard. He'd come up with a design and asked me if I'd help him out. Now, most of this project is his doing, but I did try to help out as best as I can, and I think that we did a pretty good job together. This is 1/8 inch subfloor, and I've used this on some boat projects before, and it is super waterproof, so this is going to meet our needs. Got about 7 foot of some half round trim and some Titebond 3 waterproof glue. So our board build is going to be based on this paddle board, which meets my needs very nicely. It's not a high performance board, but I do tour the bay in it. It's about 10 feet long, it's about 4 feet wide, it's about 3 inches thick. We're going to be basically using this as a model with just some slight modifications. I'm going to start off by cutting some 3-inch strips off this first piece of plywood so that I can make my rib structure for the board. So since our center rib needs to be 10 feet long, since the board is, I got my 8-foot rib here and another 2 foot. And the board is going to be mostly flat bottomed, so there's no rocker on here, but I do want a little bit of a rise on the nose. I'd like to have that nose up about 1.5 inches or so. Just kind of rounded it over a little bit with my disc sander. So like I said, this is going to be the model for the board that I'm building. So the one thing I never get, however, is that when people make these, they make their internal frame and they have a single rib going up the entire length. That makes sense. And then they have the cross ribs and they go every 2 feet or so. And the thing that I'm thinking is that I stand on the tape and I need more cross members there, but where I don't stand, I don't need so many. So I'm going to have a cross member every 6 or 9 inches here where I stand, and then I'm going to be spreading them out to about 2 to 3 feet where I'm not standing. So that's how my ribs are going to sit. Obviously they're laying down. We'll be standing up in the final structure, but there's 5 ribs right there where I'm going to stand, placed 6 inches apart, and then in the front they're not very close together, but you know, the big point is we want to keep the weight down. I have all these ribs clamped together. Looks like we've got a variance, some spots, 2/10 of an inch. So I think we can make it work, but we won't find out until we're done. So I've got pieces of 1/4 round in the corners here to increase my glue area and make sure that these ribs are going to be strong enough. The one thing I'm uncertain about is on these ribs that go into the intermediate spots, like here for instance. When I watch other people do it, there's a slot that comes halfway up here and then a slot that comes halfway down the other piece, and then the 2 pieces kind of fit together. But there's been some discussion about whether I have to just saw this in half and then glue it instead of both boards being weakened. Only one board is weakened. I think I'm going to try one out and see how it works. So at this point I'm going to start bonding this all together with 1/4 round in all the inside joints. It's clear here where there's gaps. I'm going to use, you know, similar to this baseboard. So I got some taller pieces as well so that this can all get glued into a single piece.
I have my board on top of a sawhorse with a little extension. It doesn't reach it to the same height as a table saw, but it's high enough at this distance. And it goes all the way into the laundry room. So, and then on the other side, I got my workbench acting as a outfeed table. The first step is I'm going to run a pass to just establish a straight edge on both boards. Alright, all the strips are made. Now we need to do edge treatments. So, way more strips than he's going to need. But my theory is, it's better too many than too few. This is what the strips look like, but in 12-foot lengths, mostly, except for a couple of them that are shorter. And what I need to do is I need an outside curve for one side and an inside curve for the other side, all but for 4 of them. 4 of them need to have an outside curve on both sides. So I have a special router bit just for that. It's actually 2 router bits. Now, since these are 12-foot lengths, once again, I'll be working in the driveway. Alright, so this is what we're making here. These slats now fit together nicely, and the idea is that you can do a little bit of a curve with them. And if you fall off one side, then you can increase the curve, right? So all the bottom bracing up against the ribs is complete now. I have my first piece just placed here without glue. A few clamps kind of holding it down, and I made it all the way around to the front. Didn't feel like I could make it all the way up to here. This has got a pretty sharp bend on it, but I think that's close enough. I don't think there's any measurements I've taken that are going to be critical to, to a couple inches. So the original concept on this board was that we were going to glue it together with PVA, and up until now everything has been. I think that I'm going to go with an epoxy putty, which is just epoxy glue mixed with some thickener, and I've been using on other projects talc powder. So, and the reason is that this side piece has got a radius on it, which means that there's only a very small area of the wood that touches the plywood baseboard here. So I'm not thinking that the PVA glue is actually going to form a strong enough joint, simply because there's not enough material. So I've got it all clamped here in the position I want it, and I'm going to go ahead and add the paste. So I have my epoxy on the one side here, and it seems to be holding that slat perfectly fine. So I have my second piece fitted up here on the top. It's just test fitted without glue, and everything seems to be okay except here, where I feel like I'm kind of getting close to where this wood might snap. So I'm using this water, and the coffee pot seems to get it at a nice temperature. Just soaking this wood, warm water. A little more bend on it, a little at a time. can feel this starting to relax a little bit. A little more stress on it. We're almost there. There we go. So I'll just trim this little piece so it matches up, and then I'm going to let this dry. And in the morning, I'm going to glue this one in, and we will have 2 layers. I think we're going to need 5 altogether. So it's really tough to try to film and get this thing clamped at the same time, but essentially just took all the clamps off, put some glue in the channel here, and then between the spring clamps and blue tape have this all basically clamped down. So we're about halfway up, a little bit more I guess. I'm thinking it's probably going to take 5 of these strips high to make it to the top of the board, and we got 3. So between every spring clamp that I have and lots and lots of blue tape, this seems to be working out. I guess surprise at the end is not out of the question, but we'll see, I guess. So I'm getting my 5th strip here. Looks like the height is going to be actually perfect. So we're just at 4 strips on the other side, and then we can look at possibly getting the top skin on. So I believe I've got my sides built up high enough, but with the way things worked out, yeah, the ribs don't quite make it up to the edge here. They do on this rib, but most of the other ones they don't. So I think what I need to do is at least in a few locations tie these ribs in to the sides a little bit better. So I've tied in these ribs to the side in 3 places where the ribs are really close, but I plan to stand 3 places either side. And I think it offers a lot more stability to this portion. And then up front, I kind of built it up the same way I built the sides up here. And then once this glue is done drying, then I plan to fill this in with epoxy. So that should give this whole area, quite a bit of stability. At least that's the plan. So I just trimmed off the lower piece of plywood here all the way around, like 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch, something like that. The idea that once I've got a full shell, I plan to dress that up to the edge properly. I'm starting to glue up this front section using the same strips that I made the sides out of. So looks like I'm going to need about 60 of those strips, but got a lot left over, so I don't think it'll be a problem. Well, it wasn't in the original plan. I wasn't going to bother drilling all these holes out. Use a little hole saw. Probably got a couple hours invested in it. I didn't drill where I'm going to be standing. I want that wood to be pretty strong. But anyway, I doubt I saved even as much as a pound. I don't think it was worth the effort. So I really don't have any footage of me gluing these strips on. But really all I did was just glue them down. It's kind of in the style of a cedar strip board, but just the front, I guess what's that, about 2.5 feet to the point. So, and then we'll do plywood to the back. So I've got the center spine sanded down so that it's no higher and the edges, and I'm starting to do my supports. So I've got this piece of bed frame, and I checked it with the level, and it is pretty flat, and I'm using that to make sure that these half rounds that I've glued here are going to be on the same plane as the edges here. So I've got all my rib supports here, and I'm starting to add backing ribs to the sides. When I go to put the final skin on, I won't have a way to like access the inside, obviously. So I'm thinking like maybe 3 pieces here, so that I can get a good bond. And what I'm doing is I got a couple pieces of steel here, just length of steel, and I'm just butting up the wood to the bottom of the steel. That way it should be even across these surfaces. And then that's how I also did these ribs, so that should all be even. So I'm just using my trim router here to take care of these edges on the top and the bottom. So after a couple hours with a round over bit and a belt sander, this is starting to look much nicer. So starting to actually look like a board. It's never going to be a piece of art. It's always just meant to be something that I can get on and paddle and have some fun. As we get ready to finish this board up, we're going to need to trim these ribs down. Looking back, it would have been a lot easier to make sure that they were in there straight, but either way, taking it as we go. So we have the location of the fins marked. It's kind of a guess, but we did spend a lot of time trying to make sure that the fins are both pointed the same direction. So there's going to be 2 fins, one on either side. In previous paddleboard builds, 2 short, deep fins, and these are going to be 2 long, shallow fins. Still want them to steer the board properly, but I'm hoping that I can get in much shallower water. To install the fins, just put a piece of plywood cut to 1 inch, and that's glued on the bottom and the side to the fin. And we have that in all the different pockets, except for the front. So anyway, I think that'll hold it in plenty fine. So I believe that we're ready to put the skin on. Everything here is set up. We have these pieces trimmed, and up until now, everything's been glued together with PVA glue. Part of this was I just wanted to prove that PVA was fine, but to glue the skin on, I think we're going to need some volume. I'm not confident that we can fill in gaps, so we are going to glue the skin on with epoxy glue. One thing we didn't document, just forgot to, is this carrying handle. It's just a piece of 2x4, and with a Forstner bit, we just drilled some holes and then just use a chisel to kind of smooth out the edges. All right, here's the moment of truth. We're mixing up some epoxy. We're going to add in some sawdust in a little bit, and then the fun begins. He mixed his epoxy and then added sawdust for a thickening agent, and then he put it into his quart Ziploc bag, cut off a corner, and he's icing the cake right now. And we still have 21 minutes to work this.
Yeah, looks like we gotta do one more small batch. Looking good.
Minutes to spare. So we're all clamped up. Got some totes in there, some heavy stuff. I think chunks of wood, scrap wood. And let's see. So 3 batches of epoxy. Every time you mix up a batch, there's a risk that you get a little too much hardener, too much base in there, and it doesn't set. But tried to measure it pretty carefully, but I was also feeling in a rush. But we'll see. We got our lid glued on. Epoxy's cured, and it seems to be on nicely. Went ahead and rounded off the edges a little bit. Got some sanding. When I was storing this plywood, I had a couple other pieces on top of it, and it weathered so that there's a color shift. But I think that'll sand out pretty easy, and then I'm going to seal it, and then it should be done. All right, so this is the bottom with the fins installed. So as we get ready to finish up the board, the first thing I need to do is fill in any gaps with epoxy sawdust mixture. So originally I thought that I could like hold this radius better with my strips than I could. There's some divots in the plywood. There's a gap up here, and also on the other side where when I glued these strips together, for one reason or another, I guess I didn't clamp it too well or whatever, so I want to kind of fill in some of these gaps, like where these parts met. Not exactly perfect, you know, it's loose. This piece of plywood moves in relationship to this still here. That's going to be our next step. I was going to start off with some filling, but decided to put a layer of epoxy here at that joint. It started becoming a bit of a mess, so I started spreading it around with my putty knife, and I just used my first batch there. So it's a cool day, especially for us. It's probably about 50 degrees, so I'm expecting this is going to be a few hours before it's all set up. So one thing I forgot to do is, before I seal this thing up, I need to drill some sort of a vent. I've seen other people on videos talking about sealing it up and, you know, sitting out in the sun, letting the epoxy cure, and the board pops. So I got the super long drill, and I'm just going to drill right there at the top of the handle. I doubt that much water is going to go in there. So, and even if a little splash is in, it's got to fill in the whole handle before we've got a problem. The reason I wanted to use this long drill is I wanted to keep this angle as shallow as I possibly could. You know, if the drill had to get in here, then it had to be pointed down towards the bottom of the board more. So I had the cedar strips on this side of the board sanded down to my satisfaction. They're pretty good, except for there's a spot here where when I was gluing together, this piece came unglued, or never got glued, I guess is really right. So most of the board is sealed with epoxy. However, I'm going to seal these cedar strips with sodium silicate. Sodium silicate, this is called cement floor sealer, water glass, and it reacts with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and turns into kind of a hard, clear surface. So my plan is to put on as much as this wood will accept, and then once that's fully cured, then I'll come over it with some epoxy. So this is pretty amazing. This stuff has been down for just not even 5 minutes. I mean, just as long as I took to paint it, and just kind of put my brush away, and this stuff is ready, dry to the touch. So I think I'm going to go ahead and just put another coat on it, and I might even skip the epoxy. It really soaked into the wood well. Kind of got a glass appearance. I mean, all these little joints and stuff here where there is, you know, a little space in between, they seem to be filled. So I think I'll just give this a try and see how that works over the long term. So as I'm sanding the other side of this board, I got to the nose. Well, that is the epoxy that I put down on that side. So the general knowledge is that epoxy sticks to everything. Apparently not sodium silicate. So it'll be interesting to see how the sodium silicate stands up. Some people say, duh, it's called water glass for a reason. And I guess it is. However, the solubility at 37 degrees centigrade, which is pretty darn warm, is 0. So I'm going to go ahead and do this side with sodium silicate too. Obviously skipping the epoxy. There's no use putting that on. And let's see how this works over the long term. Really not sure what happened with the finish on this thing. Turned out white and crusty. But the thing is that in the back I sealed it with that sodium silicate, but in the front it's sealed with epoxy. And they're both just really crusty looking. So, oh well, we'll see how it works a little bit long term, but I'm going to dump this in the water and see how it works. This board tracks very nicely, and it was relatively easy to paddle. The problem is that it still leaks. I need to do something different for a final finish. Hopefully we can solve that. Considering the weight of the wood, I am not terribly sure that the wooden paddleboard is that much better than the styrofoam one. I will possibly create a new follow-up video concerning the final results. Stay tuned for that.
Good. Finally, after every woodworking project, you should always count your fingers. You end with 10. Good job.
When I was in middle school, I used to go to the principal's office and get paddled a lot. I guess youth needed to get a paddleboard to be paddled even more.